Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. If you've never heard of the saying, if you don't do politics, then politics will do you, then you are about to be enlightened. We're in conversation with the author of the book with the same title. Her name is Niven Postma. She is a leadership and organizational politics expert. She's a contributor to Harvard Business Review. She is also an experienced leader, having occupied a number of leadership roles in her extensive and illustrious career over the past 20 years. Niven, welcome to Wellness in the Workplace.
Thank you, Polly. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for making the time to be here. I think we're talking about something that is often overlooked, especially when one is starting out their career, and especially if you're a person who has relatively done well throughout your schooling career, knowing that I have to just put my head down, focus on the books, make sure that I get straight A's. And usually you have the same mindset when it comes to the world of work, thinking that just putting your head down and letting your work speak for itself is the thing that's going to get your results. And often that is not the case. So we are demystifying the world of office politics just through your insight and your research and experience in this area. So to start off our conversation, I actually want to ask you a question from your self-assessment activity.
Oh, you have done your homework.
I have. And this is a self-assessment that people can find actually on your website, nivenpostma.com. And the question is, the one thing that I wish someone had told me at the start of my career about office politics was?
Great question. Mm-hmm. I wish I'd been told that you don't have to sell your soul to do this stuff, that you don't have to sacrifice your integrity, your values to get involved with politics. Because I think actually that is the most foundational myth that I have found. And, you know, it doesn't matter where I lecture, at what level I lecture, whether it's in business schools or in corporates with executives or with grads, this idea that is as widespread as it is wrong, as mistaken as it is naive, is everywhere. This idea that you can either be a decent human being, sure, or you can play politics.
Sure.
And, you know, I quite like being a decent human being. I like looking at myself as a decent human being. And so there was just no way that I could possibly imagine getting involved in something that, of course, is only murky and toxic and hideous and narcissistic, and stay true to myself. And so I saw what really is a both and as completely as an either or. And what a mistake. What a lost opportunity.
Sure. And I mean, we'll be unpacking a lot more of that, but I think it's such a good segue into the next question, just around how you started into your research around organizational politics. Maybe you can just take us a few steps back in terms of your career, some of the work that you've done, and how you got to decide on this area of interest and research, and now basically your work.
Yes. Well, it is very interesting. I mean, I've had quite an unusual career. So I backpacked for 4 years after high school, not quite sure what I wanted to do, which is not really something that you do when you're 17 and head girl and you're supposed to have all the answers. Well, I didn't. Unfortunately, I have a very wise and lovely mother who said, you know what, maybe you should travel for a little bit. This was 1990. And I did for 4 years, which was not the plan. And then came back, started as a consultant, and had my first executive career position when I was 29.
Sure.
So what I always say is, I would not have hired me as CEO. How these people hired me, I don't know.
Yes.
But, you know, the moment you've been CEO once, you don't exactly go backwards. And so I just had more and more senior roles, wonderful roles, doing incredible work, really beyond my skill set, and certainly beyond my political skill set. And so I think, like a lot of people who are catapulted into very senior positions very quickly, some of the hard knocks that come with working your way up a ladder were hard knocks that I hadn't had to pay.
Sure.
And so I had these incredibly senior positions, and I had all of the IQ. I think I had a lot of the EQ, but I had none of the PQ, none of the political intelligence.
That's it.
And so after working as CEO twice for 2 large NGOs, then working at the Reserve Bank, then working at Standard Bank, we were having my own business. It all culminated in getting fired, actually, in one of my very senior positions, like all of my positions.
Oh, wow.
A position that I hadn't looked for, I'd been asked to come and fill. And I suddenly realized a couple of things. One, there's more going on than just my IQ and EQ. And two, gosh, this thing, politics, that I've been so allergic to and just run away screaming at the mention of. Actually, maybe there's more to it than meets the eye. And maybe I should understand something that I've not wanted to understand before.
Sure.
And in the understanding, if I can understand something, can I teach people?
Yes.
And that really did prove to be the case. So it was quite the crucible experience, which of course with a few years hindsight and the benefit of all that's happened since was the best thing that could have happened. But like I say, part of that comes from a lot of the research that I'm doing now says that people who are very senior are often political survivors.
Sure.
And it's interesting, like I say, in my case, and like I say, I think a lot of people who are catapulted into very senior positions very quickly, you haven't had to survive a lot of those things.
Yes,
So you can become very senior and be woefully politically naive, woefully politically inequipped and under-equipped.
I guess that brings up then the question of how can one then use politics to their advantage so that they're able to then climb up to the roles and the spaces and the tables that they want to have a seat at. But before we go into that part of the discussion, I want us to actually have a common definition of what office politics is. I think it's always good to just go back to basics so that we know what we are talking about.
Oh, and I think in this case it's critical because it's a phrase that people throw around, a phrase that we use, that we hear, but that we don't actually know fully what we're talking about. And that was part of my either or dilemma. That was a dilemma that shouldn't have been. If we understand politics properly and we understand them as the informal, the unofficial, sometimes the behind the scenes uses of power, influence, reputation, and strategic relationships.
Sure.
Well, that definition is completely neutral. And yes, it can be hideous and negative, but it can be completely positive and useful. And so what I often do in my workshops and classes is I give this definition. I can see people are not entirely convinced. yes, that might be your definition, but it's not my definition, and it's not the definition. And as that definition sits and people percolate on it, I get people to answer 2 questions. One, have you ever done any of these things? Had the meeting before the meeting, lobbied, done your homework in socializing the idea before the decision gets taken. You can see people, yes, but that's, I said, no, don't give me the yes, but that's not politics, that's good stakeholder management or whatever. Doesn't matter what you call it. Have you ever done any of these things? Yes. Okay, that's the first question. And then the second question is, and has anyone ever done these things for you in a way that you've benefited? Because, of course, we're so used to thinking that everyone else is the politician. I'm just trying to get my work done. And we're so used to only seeing politics as the stuff that's done to us and done to other people that it actually comes as quite a revelation. Oh, I do this stuff too. I just haven't called it politics. And, people have done this for me in a way that me and my career have benefited. Okay, hold on a second. Maybe we need to think about this differently. And so that informal, unofficial stuff that happens in all organizations, it even happens in our families. Look, you're never going to get away from this. And choosing to only focus on the formal, only on what's written, what's codified, what's visible. Well, you can choose to do this. It's your career. It's your choice. But frankly, in my opinion, in my experience, in my research, that's putting yourself at a profound disadvantage. And it's essentially like playing tennis on half the court, rugby on half the field, soccer on half the pitch. The metaphors can go on.
It's part of the unsaid part of your job and the unsaid part of that job description. Yeah. You spoke about political intelligence, and I'm pretty sure people are aware of emotional intelligence or IQ and the components thereof. I want to know about what are some of the components of political intelligence, And also in that light, how can you then sharpen your PQ?
So political intelligence is about a few things, but let's drill it down to the most basics. It's political will. So you actually do want to get involved in this area of work. You understand that it's inevitable. You understand that it's critical to your career success. And most people don't have political will at all because, like me, they run away screaming, and particularly women, and that's a whole separate conversation.
Yes.
And then the political skill, really, as I mentioned earlier, but let me expand on it, it comes from building your political capital.
Sure.
And your political capital comes from four things. So your strategic relationships, who do you know and who knows you? These things matter just as much as what you know.
Yes.
Who you know matters.
Yes.
It comes from your formal authority. So yes, where you sit in the organogram does make a difference. You know, you have greater access to resources, you have greater decision rights. But it's not enough. You also need influence. And influence comes no matter where you sit in the organogram.
Sure.
And so building your influence, irrespective of your formal level matters. And then finally, your reputation, you know, your brand. What do you stand for? What do people know of you before they've even met you, before you've even entered the room? And I read something lovely the other day that said reputation is just trust at scale.
Sure.
And I thought, actually, I think that's right. And I
Trust
think that's
at
fabulous.
scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
So you have champions or people
Exactly.
who are vouching for you because they
Exactly.
trust you and they know your brand and reputation.
Exactly.
That's
Which then,
it.
of course, comes back to
Yes.
your strategic relationships.
That's it.
So they are all interconnected, all interdependent, and either mutually reinforcing or mutually destructive. You know, the more you have of one, the more you can get of the others, and vice versa.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about those strategic relationships, right? I mean, we can even maybe use the word networking interchangeably. It is that actually,
Yes.
in forming those relationships. What are the different levels or the different types of relationships that one should consider? Because you would have peer-to-peer, for example, just in terms of, you know, socializing, maybe strategic relationships with seniors, you know, more from a decision-making perspective. Do you have profiles of people or individuals that one should be mindful of in forming those kind of relationships?
Well, that's perfectly timed question, because actually I found this exercise quite recently through a colleague at Cambridge, and she used it, and I thought, I love that.
Yes.
So I'm going to use it. So I encourage people, go Google your personal boardroom.
Personal boardroom.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a fantastic resource from two British women, and basically they divide the people that you should have in your personal boardroom into 3 sets of 4. And the sets are the people you need to have that can give you information. So just help you understand the landscape of your environment, of your customers, of your stakeholders, whatever it is. So information roles, and they break it into another 4. Development roles, so the people who will support you, will cheer you on when you're not feeling all that confident, who will anchor you to what really matters to you and in your life. Often this is friends and family. And then the power roles, the people who will actually make things happen for you,
Sure.
make things happen with you,
Sure.
open the doors that you can't open by yourself. Having opened the doors, they'll push you through, push you forward. And what I now have started doing in workshops is to get people to fill in and do an audit, a quick audit. You know, it's not a massive due diligence, but look through these 12 roles and just understand where and how are people playing these roles. And what we often find is that there's often a concentration risk. So a few people are playing all of these roles, which is fine, but you know, putting all your eggs in one basket, all your hopes in one person is a risk. Or we find, oh, gosh, I don't have a sponsor. And that's often a big wake-up call, because you know, people are always asking for mentors. Don't worry about mentors. Worry about sponsors. I don't have one. And so there's one person or 2 or 3 people playing multiple roles, or there's big gaps in their personal boardroom. And or if you take out friends or family, there's nobody else. And I'm not disputing the value of friends and family, you know, the people who have loved you through no matter what, who know you best. But particularly when it comes to the power roles, unless you're working in a family-owned business, you need people beyond your friends and family who are going to make things happen for you.
had a person in leadership who vouched, for me. And the moment that the leader left the organization, and for the purposes of the discussion, I won't disclose the gender. Exactly. I was left stranded. And because I was so out of the loop in politicizing, I had to tap out. I realized that I don't think I'll be able to survive in this organization, and maybe the best way to move forward ahead in my career is to leave the organization altogether. So I want to ask the question from, the perspective of somebody who might be at risk of being isolated or ostracized because they don't have that strategic relationship, or they only formed that strategic relationship with one individual. Where do they start to turn things around in their career? Where do they start to start socializing and lobbying so that things can move in a different direction for them within that organization?
So the good news, if you've made that mistake, is you're not alone.
Okay.
I've made that mistake as well.
Okay.
and I call it being one person's person.
Sure.
And it's very easy to get into that trap when you like and respect the person whose person you are. I mean, I can think of the time in my career where I did this as well, and worked for the most astonishing person, still one of the most gifted people and managers I've ever met.
Sure.
And was needing to do a lot of work within the organization. He was on Exco, and I said to him, please, I don't have the time or the energy or the bandwidth or frankly the intelligence at that point, I only see now with hindsight, to deal with the politics at Exco. Can you deal with them and let me just get on with things? And the only thing I can fault him on is that he said yes. What he should have said is no. We will build relationships at Exco. You need to have them understand what you're doing. And instead of him playing air cover, which he did and did generously and wonderfully, we should have built those relationships, because I had exactly the same thing happen. He didn't leave the organization, but he got moved laterally. And then suddenly I'm looking at Exco and Exco's looking at me, and I was his person. And instead of being able to then draw on the relationships I had with Exco, I didn't have any.
Sure.
And so I had to reconfigure things quite quickly. So I think anybody who is in that position, hear this podcast and know that it's a very risky position to be in.
Sure.
It's a wonderful position when you are working for somebody who's making things happen for you. But don't get seduced by the loveliness of it, okay? Unless you intend to follow this person for the rest of your career. Things will happen. Things will change. They will move. Build your relationships as broadly as possible. So I think the first thing is just to be aware that this is a risk, is already probably making a few people have light bulbs go on. And then that awareness, well, then you need to start to assess, okay, well, who is it that I need to have relationships with, that I need, even if I don't like, and how do I start to build it contextually based on what matters to them, contextually based on my history, contextually based on who knows who in this organization, and then act, So awareness, assessment, action, I think these are really useful steps no matter what situation you're in.
Yeah, AAA, a different kind.
Oh, there you go. I love it.
A different kind, right. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that, people often have a negative perception of office politics, and they usually think it's an either or. So I want to ask, what are some practical strategies for anybody who still has that black and white understanding of politics to then ethically and effectively navigate office politics?
So again, I think it's 3 stages, right? First of all, bust the myths. So there's 5 myths that I've written about that I think stand in the way of people developing political will. The first one is that you can either be a good person or you can play politics. Wrong. Let me say that again. Wrong. Okay, it's not the case.
Yes.
The second myth is that you can escape the stuff. You can't. Okay, I have worked in all manner of organizations and environments. And yes, there will be different kinds of politics, different degrees of politics, sure. But there will always be politics. As somebody said to me, look up, look around, look behind you. Do you see people? Yes. Okay, well then you're going to have politics. Okay. Which then goes into the third thing, and it doesn't escape and it doesn't disappear, even if you can't see the people around you physically because it's virtual. Politics still exists in virtual environments. The form of politics, again, has changed, and how people have had to be intentional around politics in a virtual environment. Sure, that changes. But there's still people behind those screens, behind the decisions around secondments, promotions, budgets, retrenchments, recruiting. And so when it's people and there's conflict and competition over agendas and resources, you are going to have politics. The fourth one is that this doesn't make a difference to your career. This is the bonus of speaking to youngsters at the start of their careers. They can understand this stuff earlier rather than later. But it's such a heart-sore feeling for me when I hear people say, gosh, I wish I'd known this stuff earlier in my career. I had somebody say it just yesterday. If I'd known this stuff at the beginning, how different my career could have been.
Sure.
And the last is the idea that political intelligence is a skill. Is a trait. No, it's not a trait. Okay, it's not something you're born with. Yes, it's something that might come more easily to some people than to others, but it is a skill. You can learn it. It doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. And then from there, look, the skills are all around people, around influence, around stakeholders, around understanding what matters to other people, around having the curiosity to understand that you're not the center of the universe, what's going on for somebody else, about building alliances, around building coalitions of support, around coalescing around what matters, not around who you like. And those skills are then skills that you can learn for the rest of your career. And I think then the third thing is to start to develop a political strategy. So you've been through my workbook. You'll have seen that the last section is all around your political strategy. Where you are, who you are, what you're trying to achieve. I mean, this is all around the context, and strategy is highly contextual. So what are you going to do about all of this? Once you've got the will and the skill that you will continue to get for the rest of your career, how do you develop appropriate strategies at appropriate times?
So how then do you balance, being politically aware and playing to the strategy that you have in place with you being authentic and integrous?
So authenticity is a big trap, okay? And it's particularly a trap for women.
Sure.
So there's
that's not a common thing you hear, actually.
No, I have strong feelings on authenticity.
Yes.
And there's 3 stages of political maturity.
Okay.
For women in particular, the big trap to get from stage 2, where you're enduring politics, but reluctantly, to stage 3, where you're fully leveraging them and you're proficient. The biggest gap for women, but not only for women, but particularly for women, is authenticity. This feeling like I will have to pretend. I'll have to become something I don't want. So 2 pieces of advice around authenticity. One is read The Authenticity Paradox by Herminia Ibarra at London Business School. I lecture with Herminia. She's an astonishingly impressive woman. And that authenticity paradox should make you think.
Sure.
Because she says rightly that we have used authenticity as the gold standard. The gold standard for anything and everything. And actually authenticity can be a trap. Now, why do I say that? Why does she say that? She said, because when we are becoming a new version of ourselves, a different, more advanced version of ourselves, by definition, we are going to do things that we don't know, that we don't feel comfortable with. And so we're going to feel like an imposter, and we use that imposter feeling as a sign that we're not being authentic, therefore we need to retreat. Actually, the fact that you feel inauthentic is a sign that you are growing. Because you are not that person yet. But if you carry on, you will become the next version of yourself that you want to become and that you need to become. And we are all always evolving. And so inauthenticity and a sense of being an imposter is often a sign of growth rather than a reason to stay stuck. I can see you getting excited.
I am getting so excited. That is a call to action.
Yes.
Because I've never heard that perspective before around authenticity being or feeling inauthentic being an indicator of growth. So it's not that you're actually being inauthentic. No, it's that you are in new territory.
Yes.
You're expanding in a way that you've never had to before.
Yes.
And if you hold on to the authenticity, that limits your ability to grow and expand in different ways.
Exactly.
Sure.
And so you are being inauthentic to the old version
To the
of
old
yourself.
version of yourself.
And you are inauthentic to the new version of yourself because it's still coming. And you're in that
Oof.
space.
Oof.
So you are inauthentic.
That
Go for
liminal
it.
space,
Exactly.
yes, of
Exactly.
just not knowing who the new version is, but also not identifying with the old version.
Yes.
But it does not mean you're being inauthentic.
Well, you are, but in a way that's good. It's a sign of growth. And so you're shedding that part of yourself. You don't have to shed every part of yourself always, but we are all always evolving. And so it's like that beautiful Gramsci quote, which is more around civil unrest, but he says the old is dying, but the new has yet to be born. So that liminal space is a tough one. Embrace those liminal spaces, otherwise you stay stuck.
Sure.
And only you can understand, listen, am I being inauthentic because I'm becoming a new, better version? Or am I being inauthentic because I'm pretending? You know, I'm wearing a mask.
Yes.
I'm wearing the screensaver every
Yes.
day in every interaction just to survive. That's a very, very different version of inauthenticity. And that, I think, is a call to action that something's wrong here.
Yes. And I think
That's not what we're talking about.
I think that's typically what people misunderstand it to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
sure.
And then the second thing around authenticity comes from Jeffrey Pfeffer at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And he says, actually, particularly in leadership, the question is, am I being authentic to what the situation requires?
Sure.
That is a very different burden of proof, particularly in leadership, where often, frankly, you do, I do, we do have to transcend what we're feeling. What is required of me in this situation to give hope, to give confidence, to give certainty when I may not feel it, but it is required. And so again, please, people need to hear me clearly and carefully. The emotional labor that comes from being in the wrong place constantly with the wrong people doing the wrong work and the toll that this will take when you have to pretend. This is not what we're talking about.
No, it's not.
Transcend. Develop. This is what we're talking about.
That's it. A growth mindset to it, essentially. This has taken a slightly different pivot, but also very instrumental in what we're talking about, in that you don't have to lose yourself in playing politics. And we're also, again, busting that myth that it's an either or type of engagement. I want to talk about then the organization, right? The organizations that we then find ourselves in. I think for the most part of our conversation, it's been very much about the individual and how one can then, change their perspective and approach to office politics. But now let's take the individual into the organization. Firstly, are there different types of organizations and different levels of politics at these organizations? And what are those? And when is it then destructive and toxic? And how would you know as an individual?
Great question. So listen, somebody said to me a while ago, oh, yes, but politics are a symptom of a bad culture. No. Bad politics are a symptom of a bad culture, but politics are a part of every culture. So that I just want to emphasize again. And then when it comes to organizations, there's so many things when we're walking into a place or interviewing with a place that we think about. But thinking about the politics is not something that we think about. And frankly, even if we were to think about it, if you were to ask people about the politics in an organization, I practically guarantee that most of them say, no, we don't have politics here, which is, an exercise in self-deception, but an inevitable one. So when you're thinking about organizations, understand you're going to walk into politics, and then try to understand, okay, to what degree am I walking into either a highly, moderately or minimally politicized environment. And these things are normal, Mbali. These things are on a spectrum. Minimally politicized environment, pretty much what you see is what you get. The in-group and the out-group, it's not that marked. The decisions happen along formal lines. They happen in the meeting. And then you start to move up the spectrum to where you get highly politicized environments where it really does matter who you know. The meetings are happening outside of the meetings. The decisions are happening outside of the meetings. The formal matters, but the informal matters just as much and sometimes even more so.
Sure.
And I can guarantee you that if you're walking into a large organization, a matrixed organization, an organization where people have been around for a long time and where that organization has been around for a long time, where relationships go back years, where people say things like, we've grown up together, you are walking into a highly politicized organization. Just understand that. It comes with the territory. These things are normal. These things you have to understand and accept and try to discern as best you can. What is not normal, and this is where you've got to run like hell. Constant abuse, even if it's a very nice environment, people are scared and watching their back all the time. When it's toxic, when it's poison, I say to people again and again, and I say it from the bottom of my heart, a toxic environment will kill you. And I am not just speaking metaphorically, okay? When it's toxic, when it's pathologically politicized, that's not normal. Sadly, in my experience, it's becoming more common, but it is still not normal. Run like hell. Don't go into that kind of environment. And if you go into it once, understand what the danger signs were that you missed. And in my workbook, the second exercise, second because it's so important, is are you in a toxic environment?
Yeah.
And if you are, this is not a demanding boss. This is not high pressure. This is not colleagues whose company you don't enjoy necessarily. This is constant abuse and fear.
Sure. And I think it's hard to divorce office politics from toxic environments and also bullying, for example, because typically, in environments where there is a lot of workplace bullying, there are highly politicized individuals.
Yes.
They're very politically savvy, politically connected, and it's typically them who, have the influence in the right levels. So in that situation, then, what is the practical strategy for somebody, especially if you find yourself in an environment like that, you're a breadwinner and you realize that if I lose the money, my family might starve, essentially, because there are real issues and real practical needs that people have, and that's the reason why they're holding on to jobs that might not be good for them.
Yeah. Well, let's be really clear, they're not good for them. But yes, there are practical considerations. Let's get real. So I think when it comes to toxicity, you've got to distinguish, look, is it a toxic subordinate? In which case, as a manager, you need to understand that toxicity is a cancer and it spreads. And as leaders, we get what we demonstrate and what we tolerate and what we celebrate. And the demonstration effect of keeping on someone who is toxic, you cannot underestimate the impact it has on the rest of your team. So toxic subordinates need to be dealt with pretty quickly and pretty ruthlessly. And the times that I've regretted in my career is when I thought, oh no, they're not that bad. They are that bad. And but we can't afford to lose them because of their skills. Well, you can't afford to lose the whole team, and that's what's happening.
Sure.
They are checking out in all kinds of ways. So that's a toxic subordinate. Toxic colleague, build your alliances upwards as much as possible. Insulate yourself as much as possible. Get as many relationships and alliances beyond this person and around this person as possible. And then if it's a toxic boss, you need to think long and hard. And particularly, especially if you are a breadwinner. And I've had somebody say that to me. Look, I've had two people say things to me around toxicity that stand with me. I've got hundreds, but let me just share two now. The one is a woman who came up to me months afterwards, after I'd given a keynote speaking about toxicity and saying, look, this is not normal. You've got to get the hell out. And she said, Niven, I was this close to suicide when I heard you speak. And, and by my blood just ran cold because I thought, I can believe you because you're not alone. But I heard you speak and I thought, okay, maybe there's a glimmer of hope here that I am not the problem. And maybe there's a glimmer of hope that there's a way out other than killing myself. And so a toxic manager, in my opinion, you are not going to survive that very well. And so particularly, especially because you are the only breadwinner, my heartfelt advice and opinion and experience and research says get out while you still can. So yes, you have to work. That does not mean you have to work in this job. And while you still have the competence and the confidence and the belief in yourself that you have both, find something else, okay? Because, again, in my experience, it's going to get to a point eventually. And it might take months, it might take years, but it will get to a point where this catches up with you and you will not be able to work. And before it gets to that point, find something else.
Sure. I want to talk about the role of unconscious bias, maybe in politics, and people who feel like they can't navigate office politics because of that, because of their gender, the color of their skin, their abilities. What do you have to say for somebody who might feel disempowered because they feel like the alliances are formed on the basis of gender, history, background, race, whatever the case is?
So, couple of thoughts. One, there's that wonderful Alice Walker quote. It says, how does it go again? The most common way that I've seen people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. You have power. You've just got to find what power you've got in that situation. And then you've got to find the alliances and the strategic relationships that will help you amplify that power. So we all have power. This is why I've got a really allergic reaction to the idea of empowerment. No, we don't give people power. People have power.
Yes.
What we do, what they need to do is take away the things that stand in the way of that power, that squash that power, that extinguish that power. So you do have power. Try to figure out what power you have. And then, yes, there are some systemic issues. So another great article to read from Harvard Business Review is why some people pay tolls at work and others cruise the open highway. When you are the other, when you are the only, when you are the first, and we can all be that. I've been the only and the other. It had nothing to do with being a white woman because it was a very mixed group of races, of genders. My otherness came from the fact that I hadn't spent 30 years in that organization.
Sure.
And so I didn't have history and relationships and stories that went back 30 years. And I was never going to be able to have that. So we can all be the other. And frankly, I hope that people have been the other so they can understand what it's like to be on the outside and what it may be like for people who are permanently on the outside. So, you know, there's a potential paradox here because we see things not as they are, but as we are. If all you see is the barriers, you will find the barriers. And yet those barriers are also real. And so the barrier of being the other means that you pay a toll of opportunity. The opportunities don't come to you because the opportunities are happening in a closed group.
Yes.
The toll of influence, you get the opportunity, but your voice, your opinion are not heard. The toll of scrutiny, you're not seen as an individual, you're seen as a woman, a black person, a black woman, or a South African, or a non-South African. You know, so we can all pay those tolls. Those tolls are real. But then I think even more so, the need to have political intelligence to build your political capital, to overcome those tolls becomes critical. Because thinking that you and your expertise is enough when you are facing tolls is really putting yourself at a double disadvantage.
Sure. And maybe just in closing our conversation, I mean, this is literally what people mean when they say corporate is a game. And it's about understanding the game to be able to play it effectively and sustainably at that. And speaking about sustainability and self-preservation, how can employees then set boundaries to protect their mental well-being whilst engaging in workplace politics?
So the first thing I'd add is it's not just corporate, wherever you are. NGOs, government, multinationals, this happens everywhere, okay? I think probably the best advice I can give comes from one of my closest, oldest, dearest friends who a few years ago, and she doesn't mind me talking about this, particularly because I don't mention her name, but a few years ago she had a complete breakdown. And it was devastating for her. It was devastating for those of us who loved her to watch what she was going through.
Sure.
And she ended up going to getting all manner of help. And one of the people that she was referred to was an occupational therapist. I was trying to understand, but you know, isn't that physical? I mean, you're a knowledge worker. Why an occupational therapist? Anyway, this person sat her down, didn't know much about her, but knew that she'd been referred by medical aid. Of herself that she was trying to put back together again was not what is the matter with you, which would seem to be a pretty obvious starting point, but he asked what matters to you. And she looked at him and he looked at her and she realized, I don't think I've asked myself that question for a very long time. And as she started to answer that question, she realized that everything that mattered to her was really being systematically trampled on at work. And so then, quite frankly, a breakdown is a very rational
response,
protection response. And so when I speak about politics, people often think, okay, it's all about maneuvering and strategizing and like a game of Survivor.
Yes.
I'd lost, I'd play. Well, yes, it can be that. Or it can be a deep reflection on what matters to me. What am I prepared to do to hold on to it? What am I not prepared to do to sacrifice it? And then going forward from there. And so I think, that idea of resilience not being about hardening your heart, but strengthening your core. All well-being comes from having a core that matters, a physical core, a spiritual core, and that doesn't have to be religion, a values core. This is who I am as I emerge, as I unfold, as I become the next version of myself. This is what matters to me. And holding on to that and being unapologetic about holding on to that. Being absolutely fluid in the versions of yourself that you become as you explore this. But this is what matters to me at my core.
Sure. And what matters to you at your core is what will keep you well, right? And I want to quote Helen Nicholson. She says, you cannot be brave if you're not well. And it takes bravery to also play politics because it's an overcoming of yourself, confronting your self-limiting beliefs and confronting the environment that you operate in a different and actualized version of self. So yeah. All right. My bonus questions to my guests are part of my favorite part of this podcast. And I think you've answered one of them by just referring to so many pieces of work that our audience can listen to or read up on. But I just want to find this out from your perspective. What book, podcast, or article have you read or listened to that shifted your perspective about work?
I would say all the ones that I have mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me how they shifted your perspective.
Well, look at your reaction when I spoke about the authenticity paradox.
Yes.
Oh, I thought I had this. I thought it's
I
obvious.
thought I knew.
There's only one way of understanding this.
Yes.
Wrong. And I think a lot of the most interesting things in life are paradoxical, and embracing that paradox and recognizing the paradox. I love that. Hold on a second. I didn't know.
It's not only one way. It's not only one way. And what does wellness in the workplace look like for you?
My heart sinks and breaks just a little bit when I hear about people just surviving. Wellness is that cliche of thriving. I remember when I was the CEO of the Businesswomen's Association and CLC had take a girl child to work day, and I had this youngster in Standard 9 who'd written the winning essay, so she spent the day with me as the CEO. Friends thought it was hilarious. It's like, so first prize was a day with you. What was second prize? 2 days. Shut up. And I put on a whole bunch of things. I took her to very important, impressive meetings and functions and events and people and whatever. And we were sitting there that evening and talking, and I was so struck when this youngster looked at me. She said, Niven, you really seem to love your job. Yes. Cut a long story short, I realized that was the biggest takeaway for this young girl.
Sure.
She had lived with her mother, her father, her grandmother, all who hated their job. Work was just a means to an end, and you survived it, and you held on to it because it paid the bills, and you got yourself through it the best way that you could. And this young girl, 16, 17, to actually realize that not only could you, but should you, if you have the luxury of choice, which not everyone does, but you can love your job. It can be a huge sense of meaning and identity and connection and impact. This was a revelation. Sure, I was quite humbled by that.
Sure. What is one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember about office politics?
That you don't have to sell your soul, that you can't escape this, and that it's not just about you. Because the research in my PhD shows that people whose managers are better political players, more effective with politics, are themselves more engaged and more effective. So if you still can't stomach the idea of doing it for yourself, well, then understand that you're doing the people who are counting on you a disservice, especially the more senior you become, because the more senior you become, the politics are not a distraction from your job. Guys, they are your job.
They are your job. Yeah. Niven, thank you so much. Thank you for the insights, so many quotables, so many light bulb moments for me as well, just sitting on the other end of this interview. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same for our viewers. So you can find out more about Niven's work on her website, nivenpostma.com. She does have her book available. If you don't do politics, politics will do you online. You can find it from the website, and you can also order it from Amazon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your consistent and continued support. This is Wellness in the Workplace. I will catch you on the next episode. Bye-bye.